is the business of the future to be dangerous. Watch the skies. Keep watching the skies. It will shine like a beacon in the galaxy. All the universe will nothing. What shall be?
If you would just kind of give us a background and an outline of just what was the German saucer project, as we understand it at this point.
The German saucer project was an offshoot of their advanced aviation and space research and development. Disbelieving at the beginning the existence of German saucers, I made a thorough search of books on advanced German aerospace technology, and what I discovered was astonishing. The Germans were the first to develop, seriously to develop the rocket engines, the turbojet engine, the pulse jet, the ramjet. They were the first to test a rocket-powered airplane in flight, a rocket-powered, a turbojet-powered, and a pulse jet-powered airplane, piloted planes. They were the first one to introduce them in combat service. That's all what we know.
They also developed the flying wing.
They developed the flying wing, the Horten brothers. They developed a turbojet flying wing. They were working on monstrous intercontinental bombers of bizarre designs. I have several hundred slides that I've taken from books from the public domain of designs that were so ahead. The Germans developed, according to some even more advanced rumors, they developed the time machine. According to other rumors, the bombs that were thrown over Hiroshima and Nagasaki were German. The American project went along other lines, and the bombs that were produced were much bulkier and impossible to load on an airplane. A light-emitting rocket hit the moon in 1938, unmanned rocket. A light-emitting propulsion that I've never heard of, different from anti-gravity, different from rocket propulsion, probably very economic. Free energy, quite because you can't load car batteries to power the laser that would emit the light to take the rocket to the moon, obviously. In '52, German engineers built for Juan Perón a cold fusion electricity producing plant in Argentina.
Flying discs that were powered by conventional engines, basically.
By the engine,
not
same engine that they used for the Messerschmitt 262 fighter.
Which would be a conventional engine, rather than an exotic...
No, conventional turbojet engine running on mundane, low-grade aviation kerosene.
You have looked into the viability of anti-gravity, electromagnetic field alterations. Tell us a little bit about that.
Then I turned to some academic sources after the tabloid accounts. Experiments of the Russian physicist Kozyrov from the Pulkovo Observatory, which is their Mount Kolomar Observatory, close to Leningrad. He measured the weight of a spinning top, gyroscope. The gyro at rest is, let's say, 100 grams. When the gyro spins one direction is 95, when it spins the other direction is 92 grams. If you further add on a cup of hot Russian tea, the moment you drop a cube of sugar in the tea, the weight further drops down by another few grams, which is, all these effects are unexplained by modern physics. He's been ridiculed, persecuted, because the Russian black project had way more advanced anti-gravity drives, and he's basically discovering something that they have been having for 50 years. I discovered the article in the Manchester Guardian talking about Dr. Claus's theories about anti-gravity, and here I'm quoting him: just as rotating electrical charges feel magnetic forces, so will spinning masses experience magnetic anti-gravity, which is basically, if you spin a gyro, if you spin a top, spinning top, it would lift off the ground. The faster you spin it, the more weight it loses till you come to the moment where its weight is 0. If you continue spinning it faster and faster, it will lift up as a balloon. Another scientist, Bruce De Palma, did a lot of experiments with gyroscopes and proved that a lot of physical phenomena change around them, including mass, which is important here. Then I had several contactee accounts of how saucers work, and as I said, I take all the accounts at face value, put them on file somewhere, then later try to find the common denominator. In the film by Bob Emenegger, UFOs, It Has Begun, a contactee is talking about the saucers being a very simple flying electric motor. The rotor rotates one way, the whole hull will rotate the other way.
Thank you for showing up for UFO AZ Talks. I'm Ted Lohman, and with me is Jim Nichols. How you doing, Jim?
Ted, it's good to see you.
We're putting on a special segment here with involving you coming up, and it's going to be a series of 3 or 4 different times.
Well, yeah, or maybe even more.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, you know, Ted, we've been talking about UFOs for over a year now on UFO AZ and UFO AZ Talks, and we've really pretty much hit the extraterrestrial, origins of UFOs, and we don't talk too much about the terrestrial theories of the origin of UFOs. That maybe there's a technology here on this planet that has been developing UFOs since World War II.
What's commonly called the HPAC, human-piloted aircraft.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Sure. But we feel like this is an aspect that's been kind of overlooked, and we need to share this with our viewers. There's a significant body of evidence out there that suggests that a significant number, if not all, UFOs come from right here on this planet. And we're going to look at that evidence. And the piece we're going to produce is called UFOs Reconsidered.
Reconsidered.
Mm-hmm.
Does this have something to do with possibly some of the early World War II type of technology that they had?
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's a book written by Renato Vesco, an Italian author who was in the military, Italian military, during World War II, and he had access to some very interesting files, German files, on German flying disc technology, that the Germans were developing flying discs along with other bizarre aircraft during World War II. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And what developed from that. And some of the UFOs we see today, are they product of that technology?
Well, I would say, through the research that I've done and the people that I've talked to, that the majority of what we see are actually built here on this planet, mm-hmm. and maintained and flying on this planet. Mm-hmm. But it's really, it's awful hard to believe, still even for me, that our government is keeping this from us. Mm-hmm. I mean, here we're supposed to be, we're touted as the greatest country in the world, mm-hmm. and that we have so many freedoms here, and that the freedom of speech reigns supreme over all of the world here in the United mm-hmm. States. And yet, it doesn't.
Right.
And yet it doesn't.
Well, it goes back to the days of the Mercury flights and NASA, or the moon rockets and so forth. Our technology was the biggest, the bestest, the mostest. And if this is a product of our technology, this is an incredible stride for mankind and for this country. So why aren't we talking about it? Why don't we wave our flag a little bit and say, hey, this is what we've created?
Well, our viewers are going to have to stay tuned. This is going to be a kind of a weekly or maybe a bi-weekly series that you're going to present. And so stay tuned. Jim will be with us in the coming weeks, and he'll be bringing you this type of a report. Thanks a lot for joining us here at UFO AZ Talks. Well, thanks for showing up. We've got Vladimir on the phone, and we'll be asking him some questions. Please feel free, if we have time, to call in. We'll try to get some right at the end. We're going to be talking to him about the German saucer. in the 30s and 40s. Jim had the opportunity to interview him while we were in Phoenix both times, wasn't it, Jim?
Yes.
The part that showed some of the pictures and stuff was last year, and then...
well, I've seen Vladimir 3 times. I saw him when he was here in May of '91 for the World Congress, and then he covered the same material again in the Congress in Phoenix last year, and then again this last month in Phoenix again.
And nobody's doing this. Roger, you knew him when you were living in Los Angeles, wasn't that true? Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's almost about 3.5 years ago. He's a very regular attender of a lot of UFO affairs over there. So he's a very difficult man to have in the audience. He asks very pointed questions. He goes right to the heart of things.
I know. He told me before we came on the air, he asked me to not talk about a certain subject, and we'll try to let that go. Are you on the phone? Vladimir?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Hey.
I've got Jim and Roger here.
Excellent.
And we're going to fire some questions at you.
Excellent. I want skeptical questions.
Well, you probably get them.
Skeptical.
Okay. What do you want? Somebody want to start off?
Well, I've had my shot. Roger, you take a shot at Vladimir for us here.
Well, Vladimir, you've been around this scene for an awful long time. How advanced from the state of the craft, in other words, rather than going from the beginning, let's go at things from the front. And how advanced do you believe at this point in time that German technology is, we'll say here, in other words, wherever it's at? And if you can, comment about the location down in Antarctica and about some of the facilities there.
I want to make one clarification here that the very definition of German technology is a little bit fuzzy, because Germany in its European location is one thing, but the German colony on the South Pole is basically linked much closer to the secret projects going on in the United States and Russia through the, secretive channels of the basically planetary government that runs the planet. So it's not just a separate German technology on the South Pole. It's very much interwoven, probably in my opinion, inseparably interwoven with the secret American or Russian technology of the super black projects in both countries. My point of line of research has been that all behind the smoke screen of the Cold War for all these years, the Americans and Russians and the Germans in the South Polar colony have been the best of buddies in the very secretive research of the, let's say, the alternative 3 scenario, Moon and Mars survival and evacuation colonies, or the Star Trek scenario. It's my feeling that nuclear-powered anti-gravity craft has been built for 20, maybe 30 years by the superpowers and used in outer space, interstellar exploration. Basically what we see on Star Trek. It's a reality for a limited number. So, how advanced is the German technology on the South Pole? To come back to your original question, this is the secret terrestrial technology at these highest levels of conspiracy. There are no superpowers feuding with each other. They're all best of friends working together under the management of the, basically overseeing extraterrestrial and celestial management.
Well, if that was if you really feel that's the case, then how come in the late 40s and early 50s were German craft overflying the United States, and why were we scrambling fighters and trying to shoot some of them down?
Why? Well, because in the late 40s, early 50s, the Germans were still working on their turbojet craft. They were already phasing them out in favor of their spinning magnetic field craft. But many of these quote-unquote German craft over the United States have actually been secret craft of the American black programs. I mean, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand does. Actually, there are many hands to the octopus of the secret government.
What I'm saying, Vladimir, if you remember the news reports, there was an extensive flap in the very early 50s, and many of these apparently were German craft. And the point that I'm making is we scrambled a lot of fighters. We tried to shoot those down. If they were, in other words, if it was part of a cooperative program with us, and they were working with us, why the effort to shoot them down? Why?
Of course, I mean, there are so many smoke screens and camouflage going on simultaneously because the Air Force may know nothing, or the lower level of the Air Force may know nothing about the secretive arrangements, condominium arrangements with the Germans on the South Pole that probably Admiral Byrd did during his failed or smokescreen campaign to drive them out of the South Pole in 46, 47. So the Air Force may just see a legitimate enemy and try to shoot it down, but the guys above that know that, oh no, these are our secret friends on a secret mission here.
Vladimir, I'm going to jump in here. When you were down in, well, when you were back here in Tucson, there was a film that you brought out and you showed to a lot of the public. It was Alternative 3.
Yeah.
And Alternative 3, have you been able to meet and talk with Ambrose at all, the author?
No.
You know, he is in California.
Oh, fantastic. I'll talk to you later on about his whereabouts.
And but have you been able to research that? I know that there was a lot of different people saying different things about that. Have you researched that Alternative 3 anymore, especially the landing on Mars?
Well, I have found some interesting supportive arguments, namely that a lady that lives in Sedona by the name of Helga Morrow published an article in a Sedona newsletter. I interviewed her in a substantial, extensive 2-hour interview. Her father was a German scientist, moved through the possibly paperclip camp program in the United States after World War II, and worked on very secretive German projects, but before he died, he admitted to her that he went to the moon, inside the moon, to Mars, and inside Mars, but not with sulfur travel, but he went with teleportation to these destinations. So, in a way, I've gotten even beyond the Alternative 3 claims of a saucer landing on Mars by finding stories that talk about teleportation travels to Mars and Moon and beyond, which give more credence to the claims of Al Bielek that teleportation has been developed in this country starting from the 30s, and by the late 50s it was fully developed and online for the secret government projects. In the 60s and 70s they developed the time tunnel traveling technology of the Phoenix project that is described in the Montauk project book published recently by...
Have you been able to talk to Al lately?
Yeah.
Because they just opened up Montauk again. The facility there.
Yes.
So there should be some...
Tell the viewers what Montauk
They're probably organizing a Boy Scout camp there.
Yeah. Al went down there about, from what he has told me, about 6 months ago, and he had some people go in there and start filming, and there was nobody, absolutely nobody, nothing there. And then they ended up putting up signs saying, government, stay out for a penalty of imprisonment, and now they've asked Preston Nichols to head it again. So it's kind of bizarre that they've done this, opened it up again. Have you
Well, how much have they opened? I'll say that everything is concreted in concrete, all the staircases leading down to the underground place. I mean, they may open the thing on the surface, but all the levels underground remain.
Oh, no. Al just said no, that they've opened it up completely in the bottom of it. Or they've opened up new vaults and new things that was a smoke screen when they went to cement it all in. So it should be interesting anyway.
Yeah, I'm waiting anxiously to hear, although I doubt it, because they could have opened one level and left all the others hidden.
Well, we'll never know really for
as
sure.
they usually do. I mean, they would open review a small portion and hide with it the rest of the case.
Vladimir, this is Jim. How you doing?
Hey, Jim.
Just
Nice to hear your voice.
on behalf of our viewing audience, the audience that may be a little bit skeptical about all this German material.
Well, bombard me with skeptical questions.
Very good. Those of us who are fairly well versed with history know that the Germans reigned England with the buzz bomb and the V1 to V2 bombs.
Yeah.
If they had technology as advanced as flying discs, why weren't they used to combat the Allied air forces at the end of World War II, and why didn't they succeed in defeating the Allies?
Very easy. I can answer your question with a counter question. I've heard stories that Tesla developed a death ray, actually a dematerialization ray for the U.S. Army in the late 30s. You would point it to any object, a stone, a truck, a tank, a soldier, anything, and the thing would disappear. The ray would shift the target, the vibrations of the target, a little bit off time, basically and technically putting it in a different time continuum, making it disappear from our continuum. So anything that you pointed from here on to the horizon would disappear. I mean, whole armies would be annihilated in seconds. Why didn't the Americans use this thing to demolish the Germans much earlier? Obviously, I mean, no government uses its most advanced and secretive technology. They always try to keep it for a more special purpose. So, I mean, the V1, the buzz bomb, and the V2 were fairly advanced rockets anyway. Nobody had them from the other side, so the Germans were using some of their advanced technologies. But the saucers, they were very well guarded, and the Germans were preparing a retreat to the South Pole, especially after 42, when the guys with the brains in Berlin realized that they would lose the war. Anybody who knew the real industrial might of England, Russia, and United States combined realized that, I mean, what proved at the end of the war that there were 500,000 Allied planes against 100,000 German planes produced. For every German plane in the air, there were 5 Allied planes. I mean, figures that are not very often discussed in the press. So knowing this, as early as probably 42, 43, the Germans started making tremendous effort to move hundreds of thousands of people to the South Polar colony and to keep the saucer's existence as secretive as possible. At the same time, Renato Vesco, this, he's considered the Italian Werner von Braun, the research and development boss of the Italian Air Force during the war, wrote in his book Intercept But Don't Shoot that there have been dozens of full fighter attacks and Kugelblitz attacks on Allied bomber formations with devastating results that have been documented by the Allied air forces. They did not reach the Allied press for obvious reasons. I mean,
okay, Vladimir, what would you say is the best evidence, the most compelling evidence for the fact that the German saucer projects were a reality?
Funnily enough, the simplicity of obtaining anti-gravity. If anti-gravity is really obtained by simple spinning of any object along a vertical axis, as is the claim of 2 Japanese scientists from Tohoku University, Hayasaka and Takeuchi, who published a very important seminal paper in 1989 in the Physical Review Letters, one of the top 5 physics journals in the world. Simple spinning of a used airplane gyroscope would reduce its weight. It's official academic scientific literature. If it is that easy to produce anti-gravity, if one would not need the fancy science fiction hardware that Bob Lazar is revealing in his film, that our government has been secretly back engineering in Nevada test site, by using a hand-me-down alien technology utilizing element 115. Maybe this is a legitimate anti-gravity drive and you can obtain anti-gravity even by this means, but normally anti-gravity is very easy to produce. If it is that easy, then you can couple every existing engine in your arsenal with spinning lenticular airframe and produce an anti-gravity craft, and the Germans did just that. They had piston engines with propellers spinning the craft around. They had Wankel engines with propellers. They had turbojets, pulse jets, ramjets, rocket engines in inboard and outboard variations, custom-made, standard aviation turbojets they were using on the Messerschmitt 262 plane, standard rocket engines they were using for the Messerschmitt 163 rocket plane. Rocket engines probably for the V2 were used for the rocket-propelled craft that could go in the outer atmosphere. The simplicity of anti-gravity. This is probably the biggest argument that the Germans really had these things. On top of that, we've probably discovered we have the largest collection of original newspaper articles from Germany from the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Okay, but then also the reports of bomber crews, Allied bomber crews, who witnessed Foo Fighters and similar disc-type craft approach as they would were in their bomb runs over Germany and France and so forth. The alleged Foo Fighters would be seen approaching the bombers from the ground. They'd be coming up from German airspace rather than from above. Correct?
I mean, they would be seen approaching them from everywhere because they would come from underground. They would from the ground surface level. They would be hanging on the air, waiting for the bombers to come, like glowing Christmas tree ornaments in the night skies of Germany. But they were so maneuverable, they could fast outpace. I mean, they were making probably 2-3 times the speed of sound in the atmosphere.
But how were those things powered, Vladimir? Because those things look much different than the pictures. You had an extensive array of saucer pictures with big German guns on them, like with tank turrets and a variety of other.
Yeah, much later generation of craft that didn't use any turbojet or rocket engines. These were spinning magnetic field craft powered by basically free gravitational energy. But the earlier models were powered with low-grade aviation-grade kerosene. And the turbojet craft were air breathers. They would use atmospheric air as
But what about, excuse me, but Vladimir, what about the Foo Fighters themselves? In other words, these glowing balls that...
Renato Vesco has about a chapter, maybe 20, 30 pages of the whole construction of the Foo Fighters. They were spherical machines. They were basically unmanned anti-aircraft weapons platforms. They would raise vertically. They would be guided with television cameras. The first television cameras in military usage were utilized probably on these craft. They would have heat-seeking infrared capability. They would have acoustic target-seeking capability. They would have what else? Magnetic target-seeking capability. Radio-controlled, remote-controlled. They had turbines in the center of the craft. I'm not sure whether they carried the oxidizer on board or they were air breathing. I have a suspicion that the Kugelblitzes were non-air breathing, that they were carrying the oxidizer on board.
Vladimir, on this
turbines, they were using turbojet turbines.
This with all of these Foo Fighters and German saucers during the war and the Allied shooting at them, you would have thought that they'd have shot one down in Austria or Yugoslavia or somewhere where somebody other than the Americans or the Russians or the Germans could get to it and either destroy it or take it. Or even reports of bomber pilots or fighter pilots coming back saying, have you run across anything like this?
Very good question. Actually, the Foo Fighters had some automatic circuitry, and their very design was made in such a way that if you would puncture the outer shell with a machine gun or a cannon burst, the gases that were, because it was a double-shelled construction, and the outer shell was a porous, sintered ceramic material, ceramic metallurgy, probably developed for the first time in Germany, and gases would be emitted from the whole outer skin porous surface. So if you make a large hole through a bullet entry, gases would escape through this hole even more vigorously, and the craft would automatically move away from whoever is shooting at it. I mean, they had this built-in automatic feature. Renato Vesco talks on pages upon pages of all these things. Even if they shot something down, by the time it falls and explodes and burns down, I mean, the debris would be so mangled, it would take quite a bit of a genius of an engineer to put it all together. What type of a device was it flying? I think that the Allies not only captured, they may have captured shot devices, I don't know. I have no record of such instances, but they definitely captured a vast treasure of information from the underground bases in Germany after the war ended. I mean, they had about 300 underground facilities, according to Renato Vesco, that were huge underground cities. One of them, the Mittelwerk complex next to the concentration camp Dora, was 2 kilometers long by 1 kilometer wide. We're talking about millions of square yards of floor space, shop space.
If the viewers want to find out more, is there anything written on here? I know that we're going to, next week, go ahead and profile your interview with Jim Nichols, as well as some of the photos that you showed during your lectures. But is there anything that is in print? Are you presently working on a book or anything that these people would be, our viewers would be able to pick up and?
I have a long list of videos that we have made. Half of them are on basically the German anti-gravity technology, the German colony on the South Pole, secret space flights by the superpowers to the Moon, Mars, and beyond, according to the alternative 3 and other scenarios.
Okay, just before we leave tonight, before we leave you, you can go ahead and let the viewers know where they can get in touch with you?
Oh yeah, they can give a call to me in Los Angeles, area code 310-473-9717, and I can mail them the whole information.
Repeat that number.
They can leave a message on my answering machine if I'm out.
Okay, repeat the number again, slower.
The number one more is area code 310-473-9717. I can send the whole bibliography, lists of typewritten information in journal type articles, videos, the list of videos that we have, and so on.
Vladimir, let me ask you one last question here on my part. The Germans, with the technological development that they've done, there was certainly some involvement by Hitler in some very strange and unusual things. Do you believe that the Germans themselves had any type of connection with extraterrestrials or alien races during the early parts of their development programs?
Yeah, I've heard this story on numerous occasions. For example, I heard that there was a saucer crash around Peenemünde, another saucer crash in the Bavarian Alps, which may have been used as an excuse by the German secret elite to peddle this flood of new technological information, this avalanche of information to trickle it down into German economy and industry without having to explain exactly where they got it from. But I do think that the Germans were heavily involved in, they had contact with extraterrestrials, several races probably. And the more time passes, the more I'm willing to accept the idea that basically extraterrestrials have always been in contact with the major terrestrial governments, and especially the secret societies, which are the fifth column for the introduction of a particular extraterrestrial philosophy in our society. The German secret societies like the Thule Gesellschaft, the Vril Society, and numerous others that I don't even know, have all been in contact with different types of alien races. And from here comes this enmity and competition between terrestrial secret societies, which basically kind of support their extraterrestrial backers.
Let me ask one more little question here. You have an excellent selection of photos. Where in the world did you dig all those photos up?
Well, it said very simple in the Bible, search and you shall find. It's all in the public domain literature. One has to have the, how should I say, the belief that these things would be found, and they really come one by one. I mean, I'm waiting for information from Japan, information from Argentina, information from Russia, Czechoslovakia. People are coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
And anyone who calls me brings in a one new single photo, I simply download everything that I have.
Vladimir, now let's get specific about some of these. You have very good quality color photos of craft that are in the air and very advanced designs. Now, where did you find some of these?
A friend of mine, either he or some of his relatives shot a Kugelblitz in flight over Mount Rainier in the early 50s. He's living in Los Angeles. He was the owner of the negative of this photo, and he made me a copy.
Well,
I bought it from him. He sold that later to Bill Hamilton, and the photograph appeared on the back of his book, Top Secret.
Ah. Well, what about some of those that had the big cannon and the turrets?
These are black and white. I shot them with my camera off my TV screen, and they are coming from the German video documentary film called UFOs or the Third Reich Striking Back, which came through a friend of mine in Germany. He's a major New Age publisher and publicist in Germany. The film was originally produced by a secret German society, quite probably the Tourist Society. They never put their name under the film, but this is what the grapevine says.
Okay.
And the Tourist Society guys are kind of keepers of the flame. They preserve photographs, documentary material, and so on.
Vladimir, one of the things that I'm sure puzzles some of the audience is why wasn't Hitler pushing the use of this kind of technology with a greater extent? I mean, was this kind of technology being kind of hidden from Hitler by his own people?
Well, it's a good question and quite a complicated question. But I've heard stories that, for example, Hitler had a rule: never introduce in warfare a weapon that they didn't have developed the anti-weapon. They introduced the turbojet fighters and bombers only after they have introduced the anti-aircraft heat-seeking missiles in place. I've heard stories that actually the two nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were German construction. That by the end of the war, the Germans were working on an antimatter bomb, time machine, and many other bizarre advanced technologies, death ray, and so on, free energy. But the antimatter bombs were as big as a pineapple and strong enough to devastate the whole of New York or London, which could not be done with a small Hiroshima-sized bombs.
Right, but the question is...
so Hitler opposed the use of these nuclear bombs over England or the United States on a very racial reason. He said, we are not in the business of killing Aryans. This was the same reason he told his general staff when he opposed the German army rolling over the escaping British and French soldiers at Dunkirk in, I think, 40 or 41, when they were defeated, and Hitler stopped his armies, allowing the Allied fleet to evacuate these defeated soldiers in England and basically use them for the D-Day invasion again.
Okay, but after the war, as the war was winding down, it was obvious that the Germans were defeated. Wasn't there a secret cadre of his own Nazi SS that took this technology and took it out of the country before it could be captured by the Allies?
Oh, yeah. I think from 42, 43, the smart guys in Germany had made their own plans that they are about to lose the war. So why don't we just let's work on some escape scenario? So every new technology was tested quietly, low key. I mean low profile. For example, they tested a greenish-looking radiation, a death ray in Romania. Then they packed and crated and shipped everything to the South Pole. They would test it, make sure that it worked, and they would never try it again, and they would move it to the South Pole. So when Admiral Byrd arrived with a huge three aircraft carrier, it's a triple armada descending on the South Pole from 3 directions, they were beaten in 2 weeks and hastily retreated. I mean, probably the Germans had at least one smart move by not using these weapons in 44, 45 on the European theater, but concentrating everything they had in the South Pole theater.
Okay, now if such a technology, or if such a renegade Nazi force escaped to South America or Antarctica and has been there all this time, unassailed by any of the Allies or Soviets, that's really pushing credibility to believe that such a group could still exist down there. What kind of evidence
the rumor
is there?
goes that there is a large city called the New Berlin.
And why haven't they tried to complete the goals of the Third Reich in the years since then?
Well, not that they have tried, they have completed them. They have produced a master race on the South Pole, according to the rumor. They have genetically engineered and re-engineered themselves to the point where they live quite a bit longer. They have fewer diseases. They are probably able to, not probably, but they develop genetic engineering to such a perfection that, I mean, the Germans had hybrids between humans and animals 50 years ago in the concentration camp, so where are they now after 50 years? But this is a research that goes on hand in hand with the other superpower governments. My feeling and suspicion is that the tall, blonde, Nordic-looking guys that we see so often in the little gray abduction scenarios, they are in Bud Hopkins' books, they are in the UFO documentary UFOs Are Real, the Travis Walton abduction from Snowflake, Arizona, where he confronted a tall, blonde Nordic guy in the big mothership, or possibly a German South Polar colony. These are the tall blondes, in my opinion. I mean, quite probably these are the Germans from the South Pole doing genetic experiments hand in hand with the Russians and Americans under the guidance and tutelage of many extraterrestrial races and the overseeing celestial management centers and power structures that run the whole show.
Vladimir, we're going to wrap this up. We're running short of time. Why don't you give the folks one more time the phone number that you can they can get to you or write to you about the video?
phone number is area code 310-473-9717, and the address is 10970 Ashton Avenue, Ashton, apartment 310, LA 90024.
Well, thanks a lot. I hope to see you in the next couple of months. I'm going
Thank you very much
are you going to be up at Sedona here in a month?
Yeah. Thank
see
you very much for all the interest and for all the information, and we'll be talking again.
Okay, buddy. Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
All right.
Vladimir.
Interesting stuff.
He's a heavyweight.
I know from the outside it would probably, if you haven't seen some of his material or seen some of the tape, you'd just step back and you'd...
Wait, this is
You
way
know,
too much. Right?
we have a tape that we're going to be running. In fact, I cut in on some of the segments in the beginning of the actual footage that he has and documentation of these crafts, and it's just really amazing. You would never think it the way that, you know, we thought we won the war, or we did, and yet we're still poo-hooing these flying saucers.
Well, you look at the fact that from what he's got, the pictures that he's got, and these are really phenomenal pictures. It demonstrates that if that technology existed at that point in time, and I'm not questioning that, that's not an issue, but seeing this stuff in the air and seeing what it is, there's been 50 years to play with that. And it means that they've had a 50-year lead like that.
Well, you know, it isn't so much that. Jim made a question, asked him a question, how come that if there was such an elite group of Nazis that got to leave,
right.
You know, but if you look at the whole scenario, and even kind of Shane talked about a little bit on his show, the Illuminatis and the secret government that actually are the bankers that are running this, if they're running and funding a black operation like this to begin with, you know, they're going to take their piggy bank and move it.
Mm-hmm.
And they have the money to do it, and they have the ways, and if both continents are involved in something like that, they're going to allow that to happen. You know, the Americans came in and they moved all those, they created everything up and moved it up to Canada and then sent it back down to White Sands, and the Russians did the same thing with their group of people. Mm-hmm. So it isn't, you know, it really isn't that secret when you get down and see this kind of things. What do you have there, Jim?
Well, you know, we were asking Vladimir what kind of material our audience could refer to, and I was first introduced to this notion of UFOs involved in the Germans and so forth through a novel that was titled Genesis. Who's got it here?
Shane will take it.
Okay. Tell it. This book was introduced to me about 1981. It was kind of strange. It was one of those dark, rainy nights, and a friend of mine said, called, and he was into. He was working with a large bank here in the United States, and a computer expert. And he says he came across this book. He says, "You've got to read this book. You've got to read this book." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I couldn't put it down. I would say to date, this is probably the best UFO novel that's available on the market. But it's a novel that's based on the concept of the German saucer projects during World War II. And interestingly enough, W.A. Harbinson, the author, was researching a totally different book, and came across these accounts of Foo Fighters and so forth over Germany, over France during World War II, reports from Allied bomber crews, and it fascinated him, and he started digging into the research, and it's the same material that Vladimir has been digging into. And in the back of the book, there's an appendix that covers all the research and all the different books that he got into, and one was the Renato Vesco book called UFOs shoot. Oh wait, what was it? UFOs something. But anyway, then another one, the German Secret Weapons of World War II, a book by Major Rudolf Luzar. Excellent material. And W.A. Harbinson also has his UFO material and research on the Nazi project in this book titled UFOs, Where Did They Come From? Did you get that, Shane? Okay.
But he quoted, I heard Vladimir quoting some of these people that you're quoting too, so he found the same.
Right, he's come across with the same material. W.A. Harbinson has written several chapters of this book, The UFO Goes to War. And it outlines basically the same material that he researched and developed this novel from. Okay. You see some of the German saucer designs.
Where can I get a book like this? Where'd you pick this up? Is that at the library?
This is Tucson Public Library. Okay. There's also another good book that you can reference, and that is Clear Intent by Barry Greenwood, I believe.
Yeah, I have that in my bag.
And in that book, it talks about a POW, a Polish POW, a prisoner of war, who was working on a labor detail, cutting hay. He was following along behind a tractor, and they were cutting hay in an area not too far from Berlin. And on a labor cutting detail, this man suddenly recalled hearing a high-pitched whine coming from behind a circular tarpaulin enclosure which measured roughly 150 yards, excuse me, in diameter and 50 feet tall. Roger, if you could go back to that, or yeah, Alan, if you could go back to that first picture we had with the circular craft kind of in flight, that first picture. Hear this large humming noise, and then the tractor stalled, and the German driver of the tractor made no effort to restart it, as if this is something that would normally occur. And suddenly a dark gray circular machine, 75 to 100 yards in diameter, slowly rose up from behind the enclosure. He described it as having a stationary top and bottom section and a rapidly spinning middle section. The craft rose high enough to clear the canvas wall, then move off horizontally a short distance out of his sight behind a stand of trees. Now, is this a working prototype? It's really rather sick. Now, this is the craft that he's describing. The center portion would have the occupants, the pilot, and it remains stationary. And the disc portion of the craft around that was spinning.
Okay, but again, I'm gonna play devil's advocate a little bit here. If the Germans had this, and there was an elite type of a group, I mean, we saw all of the other stuff that they used. They even used it against the Brits, and some of the submarines were the most advanced submarines at their time. Why haven't we seen it since this has been going on since the 30s and 40s, why hasn't the public been aware of this? Why hasn't the public seen a flying saucer as much as they would like to say they have?
Well,
so one of you guys want to grab
I
that?
think we've seen plenty of flying saucers. There's no question that we've seen exceptional numbers of craft here in the United States. We haven't recently seen a lot of craft. But during the 40s, late 40s, early 50s.
Early 50s a lot.
Oh, there was a tremendous amount. Now we have flaps in the 60s and we had them in the 70s. It seems that even this year there seems to be a very high number of sightings. We're getting some locally here. Some things are being seen in the air. There's more scuttlebutt from other places in the United States. And I think the only thing that's happening is that with the way the different UFO groups are set up, there isn't really that kind of central focus where sightings are being collated and the information got back out to the public, so we're seeing it, so we're knowing what's going on. And I think that there's a number of the craft that are out there now have cloaking capability, and generally we don't see them operating during the day. So that's another factor. It comes down to now whether the craft that are operating are, in other words, from here or from somewhere else. That's really a very difficult question to answer right now.
Well, Tesla kind of had his finger on the pulse of things back in the 30s and just kind of backed off. I've heard Vladimir use the same thing, and that machine that he was talking about, that death ray, he did have it for the government, and they loaded it on a train, and they even blew part of a mountain up, and the government just wouldn't use it.
Well, you know, the other thing, too, is besides technology like that, we're seeing an awful lot of people who are having encounters. Now, who they're having encounters with, what these individuals are, we know they look a lot different than us. And it appears that, in other words, there is a program going on, and they're not really interested in us seeing craft or objects in the air. They're much, whoever or whatever's carrying out this agenda is much more concerned about keeping things quiet.
You have to realize that with the communications that we have nowadays and the sophistication that we have in radar and being able to put satellites and going to the moon, that each government, or anyway the superpowers, knows what the hell's going on. They know that if there's something down in Antarctica, they know what's down there. There's no hiding that. They know what's going on.
But they're just not telling us.
Well, that's what I'm getting about. I think it becomes more of a secret government. The more and more I get involved in this, the more and more I talk to people that'll come up to me and say, Ted, I was a radar man 20 years ago, and I was in North Dakota, and we scrambled jets over UFOs, and all of a sudden we were told from higher levels to erase everything. We haven't seen it, and just erase it. Just take it off like it wasn't even there. And he was telling me that when they do this type of thing, they have to go to 3 levels or 4 levels. So once it got to the fourth level, then it had to go back down and erase everything.
That somebody at a very high level knows what's going on.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, knows the...
Ted, it's good to see you.
We're putting on a special segment here with involving you coming up, and it's going to be a series of 3 or 4 different times.
Well, yeah, or maybe even more.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, you know, Ted, we've been talking about UFOs for over a year now on the UFOIZ and UFOIZ Talks, and we've really pretty much hit the extraterrestrial, you know, origins of UFOs, and we don't talk too much about the terrestrial theories of the origin of UFOs. That maybe there's a technology here on this planet that has been developing UFOs since World War II.
What's commonly called the HPAC, human-piloted aircraft.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Sure. But we feel like this is an aspect that's been kind of overlooked, and we need to share this with our viewers. There's a significant body of evidence out there that suggests that a significant number, if not all, UFOs come from right here on this planet. And we're going to look at that evidence. And the piece we're going to produce is called UFOs Reconsidered.
Reconsidered.
Mm-hmm.
Does this have something to do with possibly some of the early World War II type of technology that they had?
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's a book written by Renato Vesco, an Italian author who was in the military, Italian military, during World War II, and he had access to some very interesting files, German files, on German flying disc technology, that the Germans were developing flying discs along with other bizarre aircraft during World War II. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And what developed from that. And some of the UFOs we see today, are they product of that technology?
Well, I would say, through the research that I've done and the people that I've talked to, that the majority of what we see are actually built here on this planet and maintained and flying on this planet. But it's really, you know, it's awful hard to believe, still even for me, that our government is keeping this from us. I mean, here we're supposed to be, we're touted as the greatest country in the world, and that we have so many freedoms here, and that the freedom of speech reigns supreme over all of the world here in the United States, and yet it doesn't.
Right.
And yet it doesn't.
Well, you know, it goes back to the days of the Mercury flights and NASA, or the moon rockets and so forth. Our technology was the biggest, the bestest, the mostest. And you know, if this is a product of our technology, this is you know, an incredible stride for mankind and for this country. So you know, why aren't we talking about it? Why don't we wave our flag a little bit and say, hey, this is what we've created?
Well, our viewers are going to have to stay tuned. This is going to be a kind of a weekly or maybe a bi-weekly series that you're going to present. And so stay tuned. Jim will be with us in the coming weeks, and he'll be bringing you this type of a report. Thanks a lot for joining us here at UFOIZ Talks. Well, thanks for showing up. We've got Vladimir on the phone, and we'll be asking him some questions. Please feel free, if we have time, to call in. We'll try to get some right at the end. We're going to be talking to him about the German saucer in the 30s and 40s. Jim had the opportunity to interview him while we were in Phoenix both times, wasn't it, Jim?
Yes.
The part that showed some of the pictures and stuff was last year, and then...
well, I've seen Vladimir 3 times. I saw him when he was here in May of '91 for the World Congress, and then he covered the same material again in the Congress in Phoenix last year. And
It is the business of the future to be dangerous.
Watch the skies. Keep watching the skies.
It will shine like a beacon in the galaxy. All the universe will nothing. What shall be?
If you would just kind of give us a background and an outline of just what was the German saucer project, as we understand it at this point.
The German saucer project was an offshoot of their advanced aviation and space research and development. Disbelieving at the beginning the existence of German saucers, I made a thorough search of books on advanced German aerospace technology, and what I discovered was astonishing. The Germans were the first to develop, seriously to develop the rocket engines, the turbojet engine, the pulse jet, the ramjet. They were the first to test a rocket-powered airplane in flight, a rocket-powered, a turbojet-powered, and a pulse jet-powered airplane, piloted planes. They were the first one to introduce them in combat service. That's all what we know.
They also developed the flying wing.
They developed the flying wing, the Horten brothers. They developed a turbojet flying wing. They were working on monstrous intercontinental bombers of bizarre designs. I have several hundred slides that I've taken from books from the public domain of designs that were so ahead. The Germans developed, according to some even more advanced rumors, they developed the time machine. According to other rumors, the bombs that were thrown over Hiroshima and Nagasaki were German. The American project went along other lines, and the bombs that were produced were much bulkier and impossible to load on an airplane. A light-emitting rocket hit the moon in 1938, unmanned rocket. A light-emitting propulsion that I've never heard of, different from anti-gravity, different from rocket propulsion, probably very economic. Free energy, quite because you can't load car batteries to power the laser that would emit the light to take the rocket to the moon, obviously. In '52, German engineers built for Juan Perón a cold fusion electricity producing plant in Argentina.
Flying discs that were powered by conventional engines, basically.
By the engine,
not
same engine that they use for the Messerschmitt 262 fighter.
Which would be a conventional engine, rather than an exotic.
No, conventional turbojet engine running on mundane, low-grade aviation kerosene.
You have looked into the viability of anti-gravity, electromagnetic field alterations. Tell us a little bit about that.
Then I turned to some academic sources after the tabloid accounts. Experiments of the Russian physicist Kozyrev from the Pulkovo Observatory, which is their Mount Kolomar Observatory, close to Leningrad. He measured the weight of a spinning top, gyroscope. The gyro at rest is, let's say, 100 grams. When the gyro spins one direction is 95, when it spins the other direction is 92 grams. If you further add on a cup of hot Russian tea, the moment you drop a cube of sugar in the tea, the weight further drops down by another few grams, which is, all these effects are unexplained by modern physics. He's been ridiculed, persecuted, because the Russian black project had way more advanced anti-gravity drives, and he's basically discovering something that they have been having for 50 years. I discovered the article in the Manchester Guardian talking about Dr. Claus's theories about anti-gravity, and here I'm quoting him: just as rotating electrical charges feel magnetic forces, so will spinning masses experience magnetic anti-gravity, which is basically, if you spin a gyro, if you spin a top, spinning top, it would lift off the ground. The faster you spin it, the more weight it loses till you come to the moment where its weight is 0. If you continue spinning it faster and faster, it will lift up as a balloon. Another scientist, Bruce De Palma, did a lot of experiments with gyroscopes and proved that a lot of physical phenomena change around them, including mass, which is important here. Then I have several contactee accounts of how saucers work, and as I said, I take all the accounts at face value, put them on file somewhere, then later try to find the common denominator. In the film by Bob Emenegger, UFOs, It Has Begun, a contactee is talking about the saucers being a very simple flying electric motor. The rotor rotates one way, the whole hull will rotate the other way.
Thank you for showing up for UFO AZ Talks. I'm Ted Lohman, and with me is Jim Nichols. How you doing, Jim?